Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me here today. How about the video? I love seeing it every time it gets to me. So thanks for joining me here today. My name is Catherine Paquette, and I'm a freshwater specialist with WWF Canada. And today, as you might have guessed it by the picture that we've been showing while waiting for me to hop on here, I'm here to talk about Watershed Reports, which we've just re-released with some updated scores. And watershed reports are a national assessment of the health of and threats to freshwater in Canada. And I'm very excited to be joined by a guest a little later. Raegan Mallinson from Living Lakes Canada will be joining me here to chat. And we'll talk about how Living Lakes Canada uses watershed reports and how WWF Canada and Living Lakes Canada work together to achieve our conservation goals. So, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in the comment box, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible a little later. And I would also love to know what watershed you're from. So if you don't know what watershed you're in, not a problem. You can either go to watershedreports.wwf.ca and you'll find yours there. Or a great trick that's really easy is to think about the nearest, biggest body of water to where you live. So, for example, I'm in Ottawa right now, and the nearest, biggest body of water is the Ottawa River, which means that I'm in the Ottawa River watershed. So, let us know where you're joining from. So, first, let's dive into watershed reports. And like I mentioned off the top, watershed reports are the first national picture of the health of and threats to freshwater in Canada. And we look at 4 indicators of health. So we'll see them on the screen here. So, like water quality and water flow, and 7 indicators of threat, things like pollution and climate change. And analyzing all these indicators helps us understand where things are going, where things are doing well, where things might need a little bit of help, and where do we just don't know how things are doing. And we do this by using a standardized methodology. So we analyze every watershed across Canada the same way using the same methodology. And this really allows us to compare essentially apples to apples. And WWF Canada has been working on this for almost a decade, working with experts at first to develop the methodology because we really wanted it to be scientifically rigorous. And more recently, we work with data providers from across Canada to get up-to-date and accurate results. And the first national assessment was released in 2017. And like I mentioned, we just re-released it a few weeks ago in October with some updated data to provide a more recent state of things. So, what did we find in 2020? Well, data deficiency is still a major issue, like it was in 2017. With 100 of 167 subwatersheds not receiving a health score. And this is really, it comes down to a lack of available or accessible data. This means that we just couldn't access the data that we needed, or that the data just doesn't exist, which is definitely worrying. Where we do have enough data, however, things are looking pretty good for the most part. We see some good and some very good scores across the country, but it's really impossible to draw any sort of big conclusions because of all of the data deficiencies that we have. So what this tells me is that there is still a lot of work left to be done. One of the emerging trends that we've noticed in the last 3 years is that open data and data from community-based water monitoring groups is becoming more normalized. So when I say open data, I mean that we've got these nice big data sets, databases online that anybody can just go download the data, access it. They don't need a password. They don't need to have permission from somebody. They don't need to pay for it. It's just open to everybody. And community-based monitoring groups are groups from across the country who are doing really great work monitoring their home waters. And so being able to access data from these new data sources has really made a huge difference in several areas. And they make our assessments a lot easier to complete. So I'll now dive into 3 different regions that have 3 different stories: a concerning region, a data deficient region, and a healthy region. So first, one of the regions that concerns me is the Yukon. The Yukon River watershed is receiving poor scores for health, which is not what you would expect in a more remote region like this. But unfortunately, it's what we're seeing. And we really think that this region would definitely benefit from a deeper dive to fully understand what's going on here. So the watershed reports provide a sort of an overview of what's going on, and these results are telling us that I think we need to dive a little bit deeper. And as I mentioned, data deficiency is a huge issue. So there are areas like northern Quebec and northern Ontario that are overwhelmingly data deficient. We just don't know how healthy or unhealthy they are. However, these areas are also home to significant current and future resource development projects. We know that there are big dams up there, and we know that there will be bigger dams in the future. We know that there are mines, and we know that there are mines that are planned for the future. But if we don't understand their health now, how can we understand the impacts of any development activities in the future? And finally, a healthier region. So the central Ottawa subwatershed used to be data deficient. But WWF-Canada and its partners made it a priority and targeted investment through our STREAM project, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And so it now has a score. And that score is good, which is awesome to see. And it also helps give an overall score for the entire Ottawa watershed. And that score is fair. So what this shows us is that when we focus our work in regions that really need it, we can make a big difference. All right, so now I'm really excited to welcome a guest for a little chat. Raegan Mallinson is from Living Lakes, Canada. Hi, Raegan, and
Hi,
thanks for
Catherine.
joining me today to talk about Watershed Reports and Stream.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
All right, before we dive into things, I always like to know, what watershed do you call home?
Yeah, thanks. So I live in North Vancouver in British Columbia in the Pacific Coastal Watershed, and that's on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Thanks. That's definitely a beautiful part of the country. And so I'm going to open that question up again to everybody joining us here today. So I see that some people have answered. We've got some people coming from the Great Lakes, from the Nicolet River and Sackville River watershed and Halifax. So tell us, where are you from? And also, I would love to know, what body of water is close to your heart, or how do you enjoy fresh water? So, Raegan, can you briefly introduce yourself and Living Lakes Canada and the work that you do there?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Catherine. And I'd have to say that the body of water that's closest to my heart in this region is the Mamquam River up in Squamish. And so I'm a biologist and program manager for Living Lakes Canada. And I manage our environmental DNA work, including the STREAM project, like Catherine's mentioned before. And so Living Lakes Canada is a national environmental nonprofit organization that bridges the gap between science and action to foster citizen-based water stewardship. And we are working towards the long-term protection of Canada's lakes, rivers, wetlands, and watersheds. And Living Lakes Canada is also part of a global network of NGOs that share our mission, which is called Living Lakes International.
That's great. And we'll definitely talk about the STREAM program a little later, because that's definitely one of my favorite. I might be biased though. But how does Living Lakes Canada use Watershed Reports in its work?
Yeah, so Living Lakes Canada uses the watershed reports to identify watersheds that are data deficient. As you mentioned, most of the Canadian watersheds are, to provide local water stewardship groups with the tool they need to work towards filling these data deficiencies, especially for water quality and benthic invertebrates.
Ooh, benthic invertebrates. That sort of makes my little antennas pop up when I hear that name or word. So I think maybe that's something we should dive in a little deeper into, because maybe not everybody knows what benthic invertebrates are. So maybe can you remind people joining us here today, what are benthic invertebrates and why are we monitoring them? Why are they so important to know what's going on?
Yeah, you and me Both, Catherine. We just love those bugs. So benthic invertebrates are the bugs on the bottom of the stream, and they indicate water quality as some bugs are more sensitive to pollution than others. And this type of monitoring is called biomonitoring. And biomonitoring can be done across Canada, and the federal government has developed standardized methods to collect these bugs and get a sense of their habitat. So what kind of areas do they like to live in? And so these standardized methods are called CABIN, standing for the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network. And so Living Lakes Canada is trained to host these cabin field certifications, and it's a standardized way to collect these bugs across Canada. And so I want to pose a question to the audience. Has anyone in the audience ever seen a benthic macroinvertebrate when you've been playing in the streams near you?
Thanks. I don't think a lot of people realize just how easy it is to find benthic invertebrates. And I know it's sort of getting to winter, in some parts of the country, so maybe not everybody can do this. But if there's a stream near your house, a great way to see them is just getting in there, flipping over some rocks, and seeing what you find. And you'll be surprised. Most streams will have a whole bunch of different kinds. So thanks for adding that detail. And I want to let people know that if you want to know more about benthic invertebrates, I invite you to watch one of our previous Wildlife Wednesdays, where my colleague Ryan and I talk all about them. I even share which one is my favorite. I'll give you a hint. It sometimes makes its own little house or little shell. And so just go to WWF-Canada's Facebook page and click on videos, and you should be able to find it there. All right, Reagan. So you mentioned that Living Lakes Canada uses Watershed Reports to identify priority regions that to work in. Do you have any examples of that you can share with us here today?
Yeah, you bet, Catherine. So we've been fortunate enough to work together over the last couple of years. And one of those projects was where Living Lakes Canada and WWF adventured north to the Yukon and British Columbia border to a small community along the shores of the mighty Liard River. Oh, what a beautiful river. And this community is called Lower Post. So here in the Liard watershed, the 2017 watershed reports indicated that this watershed was data deficient. So together, Living Lakes Canada and WWF, we supported the local Casca Dene people and their newly established Guardian program to start a water monitoring program to help fill these data deficiency gaps for benthics and water quality. And so this work has really excelled. And from this, the Guardians have been able to support the Northeast BC cabin model. And they've also continued their work with support of the BC Ministry of Environment. So a lot of collaborations rolling out from that work. And then another example of our on-the-ground work using the watershed reports is when Living Lakes Canada and WWF hosted one of these cabin field certification courses in Canmore, Alberta watershed last year in 2019. And so in this watershed, we were able to certify 18 participants from a variety of backgrounds. So people joining these courses are everyone from academia, consultants, industry professionals, watershed planning and advisory councils, and local watershed stewardship groups. And so this project was part of the STREAM project, which we mentioned a couple times and we'll talk about. And so we assisted these local partners with data collection, and in collaboration with everyone that attended that course, we're able to shift the mark from data deficient to data sufficient, which can be seen in the newly released 2020 reports.
That's awesome. Thanks, Reagan. We love it when other people use our tool for their work. Really, we created Watershed Reports to give everybody a better understanding of freshwater in Canada. So we've mentioned it a couple times. So let's talk a little bit about STREAM, which stands for Sequencing the Rivers for Environmental Assessment and Monitoring. And I must say, we're pretty proud of that acronym. So since this project, it's something that you and I work pretty closely on. Can you share a little bit about why Living Lakes Canada is involved and what your role is in this project?
Yeah, so you bet. So very nifty acronym. And this project is a collaboration between WWF, Living Lakes Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, so the federal government, and the University of Guelph. And so the goal of this project is collect 1,500 benthic samples across Canada in partnership with community-based monitors. And there's no way this goal would be possible without the support of the community-based monitors. They play the main role in this project. And so, and these community-based monitors range from environmental technicians to all levels of government, Indigenous communities, water stewardship groups, academia, including professors and students, and really anyone can join these trainings, which is really cool, and these monitoring groups. And so these benthic samples that the communities are collecting are sent to the University of Guelph to be analyzed by a cutting-edge genomics technique, which is called DNA metabarcoding. And so essentially what DNA metabarcoding is that the University of Guelph is taking the benthic bulk samples, blending them up, extracting the DNA from the bugs that were collected, amplifying that, and then that's able to tell us what species of bugs we're finding in the samples, which is super cool. And so like we said before, by being able to identify what species are in the sample, we're able to see how healthy our water is. So the benefits of this new technique include faster and more accurate results and a lower cost as the technology is validated. And so really the STREAM project is just a validation project for this new technology. So Living Lakes Canada role in the STREAM project is to help facilitate the training in the cabin methods. So we're really ensuring that all the community members are collecting data in the same way. So we have a special way of collecting the bugs, and then we also collect other additional data such as water chemistry, so probes in the water, surrounding vegetation, and stream channel measurements. And this all helps us determine how healthy our waters are. And so my role in the project is that I'm a cabin trainer, and so I just help facilitate these field collection certifications to help the community monitors fill the data deficiencies.
Awesome. Thanks, Reagan, for giving us a better understanding of what the STREAM project is and basically why we need to be monitoring these benthic invertebrates. And so obviously, I think this is a really cool project. And what I think is really one of the strengths is that it's a partnership. Obviously Living Lakes Canada and WWF-Canada were environmental NGOs, but we work, like you mentioned, with academia, we work with the government, and then we work with partners from all over, these watershed groups, these First Nations, these community-based water monitoring organizations. It's really amazing just how many people in this country care about water and just want to know what's going on. And I think it's important to mention that STREAM is one way that people can help, but there are so many other ways, and I think we can get into that a little bit later. But now I want to turn it over to our audience. I see that some questions have come in. So let us know if there's anything that you might have some questions or some comments. I see some more people have talked about what watersheds they're from, which I love to see. I also see Sarah mentioning freshwater mussels are benthic inverts, and they absolutely are. Benthic inverts, there is just a huge category of species. We've got creepy crawlies, like bugs and mosquitoes, and we've got mussels and so many different types. So yeah, that's a great example. I see a question asking, how do I know if my watershed is healthy? And that's a great question. And what I would say is to check out the Watershed Reports website. So watershedreports.wwf.ca. And you can sort of zoom into your part of the country, figure out which watershed and sub-watershed you live in, and then you can see, the different scores for each of those indicators that I mentioned a little bit earlier. We also talk a little bit about the history of that watershed and, maybe some species, some animals that live in there. So I think that's really a great way to find out how healthy your watershed is. And I see a question specifically for you, Reagan. I'll put you on the spot. Do you have a favorite benthic invertebrate?
You know I do, Catherine.
I do
Because
know this.
I'm obsessed with stoneflies. Every time I capture them, I'm taking pictures and saying how cute they are. So yeah, they have beautiful designs on their back, and they almost look like, if you look really closely, like they're wearing lipstick. They have little pink lips. So pretty cool.
Yeah, that's definitely a nice one. And Joy is asking, how can she get involved in watershed health? So that's a great question, Joy. And I think both Reagan and I can answer this one. So, I mean, we talked about Stream, and that's a great way. So, you can see if there's a watershed group or an organization near you that we've already partnered with, that you can sort of join and help them in getting samples to us for this Stream project. But there's also, a lot of ways. WWF-Canada supports the shoreline cleanup, so that's a great way of getting out and making sure that the shorelines of our lakes and our rivers and our oceans are clean and don't have all this trash on them. We also have great programs through Living Planet at campus and Living Planet at work and Living Planet at school that can really encourage you to do stuff for your watershed and for just the environment in general. And maybe Reagan, can you sort of talk about ways people can get involved and maybe with the groups that you work with?
Yeah, sounds good. So again, like Catherine mentioned, even just a quick Google of what local watershed groups are near you. They usually are always looking for volunteers and have a lot of local projects. So just depending on where you live. Another great tool is another watershed health organization called the Water Rangers, and they study, they have like very easy to use water quality kits, which is a great tool for beginners.
Yeah, that's a really great point there, Reagan, that you don't need to be a professional scientist or have a background in biology or ecology or anything to be able to make a difference, right? There's so many ways that people who have different backgrounds can go out and can enjoy the water and can make a difference, right? All right, so I don't see any more questions for now. So while we wait for people to ask more questions, maybe I'll ask you a question, Reagan. So we talked about the cabin program quite a bit. So that's Environment and Climate Change Canada's standardized protocol for assessing benthic invertebrates. And so you mentioned that it looks at both the benthic inverts and the water quality and the habitat. But can you maybe sort of talk about how we actually get those benthic inverts? How do we go from seeing that they're in the water to understanding what's there? How do we collect them?
How do we collect? Yeah, that's probably the funnest part of the protocol. So there's a standardized tool, which is called a kick net. And essentially it's just like this triangular net. And each net is a 400 micron net. We put it in the water and we do a river dance for about 3 minutes, and then zigzagging back and forth up the river. So for a lot of people, it can be a really new experience, and they might like even experience like some vertigo because kicking backwards in a river while watching the river go by is a new experience. So it's pretty fun to watch everyone's different techniques. You can kind of have a shuffle or a kick, and we're really trying to get under the rocks and kick those bugs that are under the rocks into the net. So yeah.
It's pretty cool to see people in the water sampling for benthics, right? I mean, like you mentioned, they're doing a little dance, a little jig, a little shuffle, whatever you can do to get those little bugs from letting go of those rocks and into your sample jar. All right, so I see a question about children getting involved. And so that's a great question. And I think, it's really important to get kids especially, but really everybody involved in fresh water and in monitoring. And so to that, I would say the actual sampling that Reagan just mentioned might not be the best for kids, because you do need to be able to sort of walk through water and strong enough to really be able to shuffle and to sort of kick rocks around. But that said, there's lots of other parts of the cabin protocol and just water monitoring in general that kids can absolutely get involved in. Reagan mentioned the Water Rangers kits, and so I invite people to check that out. That's really cool. It's a little kit that comes basically in the size of a lunchbox, and there's so many tools in there that kids can play with, can take, and they can sample water, and they can find out, the temperature of their water, and lots of these different parameters that are really important to know. And so I would say absolutely, kids should and can get involved in water monitoring. All right, so I don't see any more questions. So I think we can wrap it up here. I think we're coming up to time. So I want to thank you, Reagan, from Living Lakes Canada, for joining us and sharing some of your work. And I want to thank everybody who has joined and participated here today. We've had some, great questions and people coming and joining us from all over the country, which is great to see. And it was really great to share with you some of our work. We work really hard, and it's great to be able to share that with you. And if you want to know more, I invite you to check out Watershed Reports website. It's been shared in the comments, so you can look for that. And it'll help you just find out what your watershed is, if you might not know, and just how healthy it is. So thanks for joining us today. And have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Ray.